Welcome to the AT Parenting Survival Podcast, where you get help and guidance through the chaos of parenting a child with anxiety or OCD. This show is for educational purposes and is not intended to replace the guidance of a qualified professional. Here's your host, child therapist, Natasha Daniels.
Welcome to another episode of the AT Parenting Survival Podcast. Today I want to go over some of the really common mistakes that most of us will make at least some point in our journey trying to help our kids, teens, and young adults with OCD. So we're going to talk about what those are and what to do instead. But before we jump in, I want to thank NoCD for sponsoring this episode. NoCD offers affordable, effective, convenient therapy, and they're available in the US and outside the US. You can schedule your free 15-minute consultation to see if NoCD is a right fit for you and your child. Just go to treatmyocd.com. That's treatmyocd.com. I'll also leave a link in the show notes. I want to mention too that my free series, Survival Tools for Parents Who Are Raising Kids with Anxiety and OCD, has started. But that doesn't mean that you can't participate. The series are 3 on-demand videos that you can watch at any time while the series is happening. The series ends November 14th. Hold on, I'm looking. Actually, it ends November 16th because for the weekend we do a replay of the series. And so if you're listening to this before November, oh my God, I have no brain. I forgot what I just said. November 16th, then feel free to register at atparentingsurvivalseries.com. And I do this series twice a year, and there are people who take it every single time because it's just such a great reminder, such a skill builder. And we do 3 bonus live classes, and we stream that on our series website. So you don't have to be on social media for this series at all if you don't want to. We do have a bonus series, temporary series Facebook group, but that is just a supplement. This is all on a series website. And so most of it you could just do on your own time, or actually all of it you can, or watch the replay. And you can even watch the bonus live classes on replay. So register at atparentingsurvivalseries.com. We're going to be talking about how do you motivate your kids? How do you do effective exposure response prevention, the go-to therapy for OCD at home? And we're going to talk about that today too. And how do you motivate an unmotivated child? How do you create a therapeutic home environment, even if your child's not wanting or able to work on their OCD? So all sorts of really good conversations. So definitely check that out. Okay, let's jump into today's episode and let's just jump right into mistake number 1. Now, caveat, because I'm using the word mistake, we all make these mistakes. I would be surprised if there's anyone listening who has not made at least one of the 7 mistakes I'm going to talk about, including me. And I will be sure to share the many things I've done wrong as we go through this. So put the whip down. This isn't about making you feel bad. This is about we do better when we know better, right? We do the best with what we have. I'm just full of cliches today. And that's just the fact. And so this is more for you to see why we make these mistakes and then how to pivot. And by the way, it's never too late to pivot. No matter how old your child, teen, or adult is, I feel like we're constantly growing and constantly learning, and that life is just one big, huge lesson. Mistake, learn, grow, mistake, learn, grow, and rinse and repeat. And it's the same with OCD too. So there's my big caveat for you. All right, now let's get into it. So the first one I want to talk about, and some of these are going to be really obvious to you and some of them aren't. So stick with it. The first one may be obvious, but maybe not to all of you, especially those of you that are brand new on this journey. Using logic to talk OCD away. This is what parents do who aren't skilled or knowledgeable about OCD. They try to explain why their child doesn't need to worry about that intrusive thought. They try to reassure them over and over that whatever the intrusive thought isn't valid, or they don't need to worry about it. They try to rationalize. Your hands are clean enough. You don't need to walk through the doorway 5 times. You're not going to stab yourself with that knife. We try to rationalize with them. We try to speak directly to them because we think if we can reach them, then we'll give them relief. But this is why it backfires, because All of those things, this is where your mind gets blown when you're talking about OCD, are actually compulsions. This is why OCD is a slippery slope that requires you to get educated. It's one of those things that you can't just hand off to a professional and say, here, take my kid and make things better, because it is often a counterintuitive, nonsensical disorder that rapidly can grow and get out of control. And without understanding it, we make it bigger. And that's scary. And so that's why you're listening to this episode. That's why you're doing research. It's why you're learning, because rationalizing OCD just makes kids feel stupid, and it makes them feel dumb. It makes them feel shameful, because they know a lot of our kids know that this stuff is irrational, but it doesn't matter. That's why therapists talk about it being ego dystonic. It's not aligned with who their beliefs or their thoughts. Now, I will say that kids on the spectrum are sometimes don't have that insight, and so you're tempted to rationalize, but it still doesn't work. Reassuring is also often part of an OCD loop. And so they seek the reassurance, you provide the reassurance, and now you're part of the compulsion. So that's why it backfires. What to do instead? Well, validate their struggle, validate that they're struggling with OCD, that this is an intrusive thought, and help them move towards ERP-based responses. And if you don't know what that means, we're going to talk about that too. But ERP is the evidence-based approach for OCD. It's the first line approach for OCD. It stands for exposure response prevention. It's a type of cognitive behavioral therapy. Not every CBT therapist has been trained or specializes or even knows what ERP is. So you have to find an OCD specialist. And an ERP-based response would be, can I delay what OCD wants me to do? Can I eventually ignore what OCD wants me to do? Can I actually do the opposite of what OCD wants me to do? If in that context, it makes sense. It depends on the compulsion or on the intrusive thought. So that's mistake number one. We're going to go through these rather quickly because we could talk all day long about each one, and we don't want this to be like a 5-hour episode. Okay. Mistake number two, accommodating OCD to keep the peace. Oh, I know we all have done this. This is something that you absolutely have done, more likely than not. So don't feel bad, but we have to understand it. So a lot of times what parents do is they modify routines, they answer compulsive questions, they remove triggers, they follow OCD's rules, and OCD dominates the house. Why does it backfire? Because OCD grows stronger with every accommodation that we do to enable OCD. So when I'm following OCD's rules and OCD says, Dad can't go in the kitchen, or Mom can't sit on that chair, or don't touch my backpack, or you need to wash your hands before whatever, like following, and it could be anything. I'm just giving you examples. When we craft our home to adapt to OCD's rules, our home has been hijacked by OCD, and OCD will grow stronger. It will add more rules, more lists. You think that you're creating some relief from your child because you're not seeing them in a short-term distress, but you're creating a long-term disorder that is getting worse and is getting stronger. And so what do you want to do instead? And this is easier said than done, I'll give you that. But you want to gradually reduce those OCD accommodations in a structured, systematic way. And so read books and educate yourself. Alec Pollard wrote a great book and has a great program called When a Loved One Won't Seek Mental Health Treatment. And he has a whole approach to that can be really helpful. Ellie Leibowitz has the space treatment approach at spacetreatment.net, and he has written a book as well. And those will systematically walk you through how to pull back OCD accommodations. You can get a space-trained therapist to help guide you. Alec Pollard and his team have therapists that will help guide you. And I have a space study guide course, if you're into like just on-demand courses and a DIY approach to it, that will walk you through the space approach and teach you how to do it. And you can find that at natashadaniels.com/space. But I think the important thing to know with this is you don't do it just willy-nilly. You don't just say, oh, accommodations are bad, so I'm going to pull them back whenever I feel like I'm doing it. You have to do it systematically. I do have episodes on how to pull back accommodations. Actually, I think last week's episode was on the mistakes that people make when pulling back accommodations. So watch episode 443. Okay, moving on from there. Mistake number 3. This is a big one. Treating OCD like anxiety. Now, if you're deep into this journey, you've been there, you've done that, you know this, but a lot of people don't. So this is what parents do. They use coping skills that are meant for anxiety, like reframing their thoughts. You're not a bad person. Let's talk about why you're not a bad person. Or you're not going to throw up. Let's talk about why you're not going to throw up. They use coping skills meant for anxiety. They also talk about let's just breathe. Let's just take some deep breaths. Let's distract ourselves, which I actually think is not good for either one unless you're in a panic attack or anxiety attack. But they'll use coping skills that are meant for anxiety. And why it backfires is because OCD, one, is centered around a different part of the brain. The amygdala does like to light up. Amygdala is kind of the culprit, the main culprit for anxiety, not the only culprit, but the main culprit. And with OCD, the main culprit is the circuitry in the basal ganglia and the prefrontal cortex. And it goes much deeper than that. I'm not a neuroscientist, but they are different parts of the brain. The origin of the problems, different parts of the brain. The mechanisms of the disorders are different. They're in different DSM categories now. DSM is kind of the Bible of mental health diagnoses, what a diagnosis is, the criteria for it. OCD was in an anxiety disorder category, and now it's in its own category, obsessive compulsive spectrum disorder. So you've got hoarding under there and some other different things, but it was removed because it is a different disorder and it cannot be treated like anxiety. And so you can't just breathe, distract yourself, calm your nervous system down, reframe those upsetting thoughts, and find progress. In fact, a lot of times parents start to realize that they're dealing with a different beast when they're trying all of those things, or a therapist is telling them to do all those things and it's falling flat, or it's making it worse. So what to do instead? Well, you want to target those compulsions through exposure response prevention. You want to learn the skills that are specific to OCD, including ERP and spotting intrusive thoughts and feelings, understanding OCD themes, educating your child on what OCD is versus anxiety so that they understand, because a lot of times what you see is just the tip of the iceberg. You're seeing the really overt intrusive thoughts and compulsions, and normally there is just a huge iceberg underneath of things that you may never see and may never know. So ultimately, our goal is to be a coach for our kids, to lead them, give them breadcrumbs to the right resources, to the right videos, to the right books, to the right support group calls, to the right therapist, so that they build the right skills and things aren't making them inadvertently worse. That's really important. Okay, let's talk about mistake number 4. This one's a big one, and this one might actually be happening even if you've been on this journey for a while. And that is waiting for motivation before starting. A lot of people do this. And I get it, because you kind of put your hands up in the air and you say, you know what? They're not ready yet. I'll just wait until they're ready. What can I do? They're not wanting to work on this. And so I just have to wait until they're ready. That's a problem. It backfires because OCD rarely gives you a window of readiness. It's very rare that our kids are 100% ready. Sometimes they are. I see parents in the AT parenting community who have, and people that join my free series where their kids are biting at the bit and the parent doesn't know where to start. So the parent's playing catch up. I do see that sometimes in my survival series, because we do the beginning of the series, and you'll see it when you join, is that there's a quiz, and there's a quiz to see where you're at with your knowledge. And I talk about being a map or a compass or a GPS as far as like your ability to get to the right spot where you need to be to help your child. And we talk about your kids, and there's a quiz that you can take for your kids and see where they are at. Is their foot on the brake? Is it on the gas? Are they cruising and they don't need anything? And you don't know where to start until we actually know where you are. And that's why we start with that in the series. And a lot of parents will come in there and they are a compass, which is barely knowing where to go. Like they know, okay, I need to go in that general direction. I think I know we're talking about OCD, but they don't know anything else. and their child's foot is on the gas. They're like, help me, give me tools, tell me what to do. I want to work on this. And so they're playing catch up. More often than not, though, that's not the case, but sometimes it is. A lot of times, the parent is a compass. They don't know exactly what to do, or they're a GPS, not a GPS. They are a map where they know a little bit about their child's issues, but they don't know about all the other OCD themes that can pop up, which you do need to know because OCD morphs, shifts, and changes, and you may not know that, or you might miss it because you only are hyper-focused on the one theme that your child is showing in this moment. OCD has a multitude of disguises. There are so many different themes and fears that come up with OCD, and they look really different. And if you don't know that, you're going to miss it. And so a lot of times parents are just waiting, or the child's foot is on the brake, and they're like, I'm not going to learn anything because what's the point? And I see that a lot. I do an exit survey in my AT parenting community, which is my member community, which is separate than my free series. It's an in-depth supportive community at atparentingcommunity.com. And sometimes parents will leave because I do an exit survey. I do a survey twice. I email them a survey just to see how am I doing. And I'm always trying to improve that community. It's where we get a lot of our ideas is from that survey. But when people are leaving, it really breaks my heart when I see people leaving because they say my child doesn't want to work on it. And so we're going to put a pause on this. And I'm like, no. And sometimes the survey's anonymous. And so I'm like, I wish I could email them and be like, no. There's so much that you can do as a parent to help your child, and that we should do as a parent, that we're obligated to do as a parent. And so what can parents do? Well, they can educate themselves, like I just said, on what do I need to do to create a therapeutic home environment. And creating a therapeutic home environment isn't just about your child working on stuff. It's what can you do? How do you respond to OCD when OCD wants you to grow it? How do you talk about OCD? How do you support your child around the supplies that's needed for OCD? How do you prevent OCD from hijacking the whole entire household? How do you help the other kids when the child with OCD is having a very scary meltdown? How do you do those things? Do you understand if OCD showed up in a completely different way? If your child all of a sudden started to talk about feeling like a bad person, would you be able to spot that that's an OCD theme? Or if your child started to think about, I'm afraid I might stab myself with a knife, would you know that that actually is an OCD theme? Or if your child started to balance out their left hand to their right hand, would you know that that's an OCD theme? Or if your child is gagging and can't handle smells and can't touch things that might give them a smell, would you know that that's actually an OCD theme? You would if you were educated. And so educating yourself is really important. So the first step, join my free series. It doesn't cost you anything, and I will start educating you. And that's a great first place to go, atparentingsurvivalseries.com. All right, we're going to take a break, and then I have 3 more mistakes that I want to talk about and what you can do about them. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
It's time we put help directly in our kids' hands. Introducing Crushing OCD course for kids and teens.
It was way more helpful than all the other therapy we've ever done because we didn't really know what to do. So we weren't really doing it before. So the course helped to figure out what the exposures are and how to do them.
We're not in therapy and find it really hard to find an ERP trained therapist here. So we're currently with the public health service, but again, they don't seem to be trained in ERP. It's filled that gap that we don't have that was desperately needed.
This was really well timed for us to use between therapists and to help us get off to a good start with this new practice.
It was easy to use. I was able to do it from my phone or also on the computer.
There's different ages, so there were younger kids, there were teenagers, and so that was really nice too, to have a variety of ages where it wasn't just geared towards younger kids or older kids. It was a nice variety.
It's helpful for our kids to hear it from this third party as opposed to just us saying it.
I really like the offense and defense method. I love working on poking at OCD while it's sleeping. It makes it a little bit easier to do, and it's kind of fun. I'm planning on using it to work on my fear of holding or touching batteries and stuff like that.
So it was really helpful, and I think a lot of other kids would like it. I thought that I was the only one who had worrying about the weather and stuff. And then there was somebody else on there who worried about the same thing, which was really helpful.
seems less scary to work on stuff now that I've watched this class, and I'm more interested to work on it.
I like trying to do more exposures still, and before I wasn't, I just didn't want to do them.
I've worked on some of my bigger compulsions and been successful.
I realized that it was helpful to do like the exposures. Before it was like really, really hard. It's still hard, but it's helpful to know that I need to do them.
Before there would be a lot of battles about it, so it is definitely less loggerheads.
Really, really good course and super helpful.
Definitely would recommend this. It's really easy to follow. It's nice bite-sized videos. I really like the worksheets that go along with it, and I think it's really helpful.
To learn more about this course and register your child or teen, go to atparentingsurvivalschool.com. Welcome back. Okay, let's just jump right in. Actually, I'll summarize the first 4 really quick. I have been creating handouts. I know I've been getting some messages that you guys are really liking the idea of handouts. I am, when possible, when it makes sense, creating a supplemental PDF handout to go with my podcast episodes so that you don't have to take notes, or you can print it out, show it to your partner or other relatives, or just have it, put it in a binder. When you go to natashadaniels.com/handouts, you can sign up and then you'll get access to our page where we put all of our handouts. And so you might find some other handouts from other episodes interesting. You might want to circle back and go listen to those other episodes based on looking at the handout. Just look for episode 444 when you look at the handouts and go to natashadaniels.com/handouts to get this one. And I will give you the list of all these mistakes and what to do instead. Okay, let's get back to the list. We're on number 5. Okay, mistake number 5. This is the big one. Now this is not an obvious one either. So this might be for those of you that have been around for a while. Relying on the therapist to fix OCD. So sometimes parents assume that weekly therapy is enough, or even if their kid's in like an intensive outpatient, they think that, hey, they're in good hands. They're being dealt with the professionals. But it backfires because OCD recovery happens in the daily moments at home, and OCD is a family affair. More often than not, if your child, teen, or young adult is living at home, they're involving you in some capacity. And so we have to do our part. You have to know how to spot OCD themes. I already kind of drilled that home. In mistake number 4, you just can't have that blasé attitude like, I don't have to know about OCD because I've identified that they have OCD, and so now I'm just going to send them to a specialist. It morphs and shifts, and you have the front row seat to see this. In fact, you will catch things way before the therapist will because you're watching it in real time. It kind of reminds me of when my daughter, this is totally different, by the way, about to go on a tangent for a second, but like when my daughter was diagnosed with celiac. Now they all have anxiety and OCD as well. And I obviously got that no matter what, I have to have my mom hat on and I have to know my own skills, but that's pretty easy because I'm a therapist already doing this stuff. A little bit trickier for you. But for me, just to give you an example that was hard for me, my daughter was diagnosed with celiac when she was 6. And I remember being handed this huge binder by this gastroenterologist who was horrible, by the way. We have a really good one now. And he said, well, first of all, I was going there to just check off a box. I was going there to like just rule out any medical issue around her stomach because she had emetophobia, the fear of throwing up, and was like she was refusing to go to school and all sorts of stuff. And so I was like, she's 6. Let me just check the box off. I always tell you guys, rule out medical. And so I'm like, I need to practice what I preach. So I brought her to a gastroenterologist and he ran some blood work or whatever. And we came back just for the follow-up. And I was just expecting him to be like, you're good. And then I could check that box off and move on in the way that I was going. And he was just so cold and callous. And he was like, yeah, she has celiac. Here's a binder of like how to parent a child with celiac. And let's schedule an endoscopy just to like make sure. And I was just a deer caught in headlights. But my point is, it wasn't good enough that I just had this GI doctor. I had to go, the binder was horrible and stupid, but I was in complete panic because I didn't know how to feed my child. I didn't know how to create a lifestyle around celiac. And some of you probably who have kids that are gluten-free can relate to this, especially those that have celiac, where this is really important and it's going to impact their health. And so I had to deep dive. I wish there was a course, and I searched so hard for a course that was like, so your child was diagnosed with celiac, now do X, Y, and Z. I would have died for a course like that. So you're lucky I have courses on how to teach kids to crush OCD, how to teach kids to crush anxiety, how to do the space course. Like, I was looking for the version of me for celiac, and it did not exist. Sometimes I think I should create it, but that's not my thing. But that's what I wanted. I wanted someone to just give me the Cliff Notes short version of what do I do? Eventually I learned, though. I immersed myself in education. I learned that gluten is in soy sauce. Who would have known that gluten is in a lot of syrups, like things that I would not have thought were obvious? I learned how to use blue tape to put blue tape on things that are gluten-free for her so she could see it. Like, I learned how to get 2 toasters, and I learned how to talk to restaurants about cross-contamination. I learned that people use, the same oil in the same fryer. And so even if it's gluten-free, but they're frying it in that oil, she can't have it. I learned all this stuff. Why? Because I was the parent and I needed to take the reins on how to help her and create an environment for her at home, and when we were out of the home, that was conducive to her health. It's very similar with OCD. You have to do that for OCD. And some people have been on this journey for a really long time, but haven't done that deep dive because they say, my child's not wanting to work on it, or therapy is either in therapy, they're in good hands. At the end of the day, these professionals, they go home and they're on to the next client. They're on to the next patient. It's a job, and it's a passionate job. I'm not minimizing it because I am a therapist myself, but it's a job. This is our child. This is our life. No one will be with your child for this entire journey other than you and themselves. And so parent training is essential, and that is why I do what I do. So definitely get your education. It's key. Okay, sorry, I went on a tangent on that one. Let's go to mistake number 6. Avoiding triggers to prevent meltdowns. This is super common. I see this a lot in my members of the AT parenting community. I see this from myself, where you're like, I don't want to rock the boat. So parents will change their life to prevent distress. This kind of goes back to OCD hijacking the house. And OCD is very good at being very scary. So some of our kids can get aggressive. They can get violent. They can say hurtful things. They can threaten to harm themselves. And so they can threaten to not eat. That's scary when OCD will bring out the big guns to make us fearful and back down. And meltdowns are part of that. I feel like I always look at OCD as like a 2-year-old toddler, and that is very annoying. But it backfires because when OCD becomes the boss of the household, OCD will not back down. It's like a fascist dictator in your home. And once you give it a little bit of power, it wants more. It puts your whole house on lockdown. And I've seen people go from mildly, walking on eggshells to the entire house not being able to function. People are not able to come over, or you're not allowed to go out, or you can't touch this stuff or that stuff, or sit here or do that or say that. It can become all encompassing where everybody is literally trapped in the house. That's not helpful. So what do you do instead? It's not easy. And I really get annoyed when therapists, and even in the SPACE program, they make this sound easy. And I just want to validate for a second, having my own kids with anxiety and OCD and ARFID and ADHD and all the other acronyms, that this is hard. I have a dysregulated child, and I know what it can be like to have them triggered and for it to feel out of control. And so this takes time, but planning, first of all, a safety plan is important. Who do I call in a crisis? Is there a mobile crisis team in my community that I can call? Research it now so you have it. Maybe you'll never need it, but it's good to know. Can I have a crisis plan with a therapist? What do I do if they're saying they want to harm themselves or other people, or if they're scratching at themselves, or if they're threatening not to eat? Whatever it is that's scary, have that plan. And I know even when you have that plan, it's still so hard. And then teach them some self-regulation tools. And so there are some times where I'm working with parents in my community and I'll say, I don't think they're ready for anything. I don't think they're ready for ERP. I think they need they need some self-regulation tools, whether that's DBT, which is a type of therapy that teaches them how to self-regulate, or whether you work on it at home. But sometimes our kids need to learn how to handle the discomfort and the overwhelm. And sometimes for some of our kids, they need mood stabilizers. And that was the case in my house, that my child needed a mood stabilizer in order for him to be able to self-regulate and for us to push the dial a little bit more. Once he was on a mood stabilizer, the meltdowns calmed down. Also, if you're seeing severe meltdowns, intense rage, and OCD, and some other symptoms that could be indicative of PANDAS or PANS, you want to look into that as well. This isn't about PANDAS and PANS, but if we're talking about meltdowns, we have to include that because that is one of the red flags. If your child has meltdowns, it doesn't mean they have PANDAS and PANS. I know sometimes people, I'll see this in my public Facebook group, somebody will mention meltdowns and they have PANDAS and PANS. Not every kid with meltdowns has PANDAS and PANS, but go to pandasnetwork.org, learn about it. If you're like, what is that? Or I don't know, look at the symptoms and the signs, and you can even find a practitioner and you can go down that road to rule that out. My son was diagnosed with PANS, and then I called them when he's having a problem right now, and they're like, he doesn't have PANS right now. He just has habitual residual issues. Well, he has ARFID, which is restrictive eating, severe ARFID, to the point where we are actually going to the GI doctor today to see if he needs to be G-tubed. And I'm looking at a partial hospitalization program. So very, very intense. But the CPAE clinic, the PANDAS PANS clinic, was like, he doesn't have PANS. I'm like, okay, I guess I'm not getting help there. That's fine. But regardless, we need to get help. So I went on another tangent, but go and look into that if you have not heard of it, or if you think, oh, that's something I need to check off. Okay. Mistake number 7. Thinking ERP, exposure response prevention, is only about facing fears. So sometimes parents will push exposures like touch that or do that, or I'm not going to accommodate that, without addressing the compulsive response. And so it backfires because exposure alone is not ERP. A lot of times members of the AT parenting community will say to me, the therapist says that life is an exposure, so they don't need to do ERP, or that they're getting exposed to their triggers all day long, so they don't need to do ERP. Or even kids will say, I get exposed all day long. Why do I actually have to do ERP? It breaks my heart when a therapist is saying that, especially if they're saying they're an OCD therapist and they're telling a parent that, which I have heard. That's really upsetting. Because no, exposure to the trigger is just life with OCD. Yeah, I mean, you might have an artificial trigger, but it's still not ERP unless it's paired with the RP, which is response prevention, which is not doing the compulsion ever, right? So if I'm going to touch this, then I'm not going to wash my hands. I might even get a piece of cloth, and when I do wash my hands, I'm going to recontaminate them with the thing that I touched to give it that longevity of that exposure. And so the RP is really important. It's not just, oh, well, they go to school all day long and that's really exhausting for them, and there's so many exposures around there. Now, sometimes I use the word exposure in more of a casual way. I was actually talking to a member of the community last week, and I said, I can't remember what we were talking about, but they were saying something, and I said, they were saying if they should do something. Oh, I think it was about someone being hugged, and if they should prevent them getting hugged or not. And I said, it's actually a really good exposure for people to hug them, and then they can advocate if they don't want to be hugged, but you don't have to intervene. I wasn't meaning it was ERP, exposure response prevention. That wouldn't be. We can use that word in just a general sort of way, but when we're talking about ERP, we have to have that RP, that response prevention. Okay, because we want to teach our kids to sit with the discomfort without ritualizing. That's the whole important part of ERP. All right. That actually was the last one, and I forgot to kind of build that up and say that was our last one. I'm just going through my list. I got on the tangent about CPAE and PANS and got me angry, and then I kind of forgot. I want you to know that no matter what you have done, that today is a brand new day. Every day is a brand new day, and that nothing changes overnight most of the time. And so take one small step at a time. Take one thing that you heard today that seems doable, that didn't overwhelm you, and say, I'm going to work with that one. I'm going to do this X, Y, and Z goal. And then take it down a notch. What's something even smaller from that goal that you can do? What's a baby step? Often we get too overzealous, or we feel so guilty that we're not doing enough. And then we bite off more than we can chew, and we can't be consistent with it. And it's not good for us. We can't self-regulate ourselves. It brings on too much stress. And so there's a lot of things to consider when you're making changes for the betterment of your child long-term. Because when you do a lot of the things that I talked about today, there will be anger from your child. OCD will get really upset. OCD will have a tantrum. Behaviors can get worse before they get better. And so we have to have a stomach for that. We have to have our own support for that. And there are times where you don't have the support, or you don't have the mental health bandwidth to do it. And so you come first. And I know that can sound horrible, but if you are not okay, you can't be there for your child. And so, or teen or young adult. I always say that because we're not talking about little kids. We're talking about anyone, any child that you are a parent to. And you have to be okay first. So what can you handle, if anything, from what we talked about today? And if you can't handle anything, that is okay too, because that is data, that's information that says, I just listened to that and that made me feel really overwhelmed. I don't think I'm okay. What do I need to do? So maybe your first goal is, I need to get some support, or I need to just soak up some knowledge or information, or I need to get my own therapist so I can anchor myself, or I need to tap into my support system, or I need to focus on my own mental health for a little while. Whatever it may be, that's still information on what your next step is. Now, for some of you, you might be taking the reins. You might be like, I'm going to do number 3 and number 5 and number 7. That's awesome. Just pick one at a time. All right. And if you have the bandwidth, join me in my free series. This is the second week of the series, so it is ending soon. And I would love to have you over there. We have a bonus class coming up tomorrow on the website. I would love to talk to you, answer your questions live. Join me at atparentingsurvivalseries.com. I hope that you're finding this podcast helpful. And if you are, don't forget to hit a star, rate it, write a review. That helps not only me, but it helps other parents recognize that this is a clinically sound, helpful parenting podcast for OCD. And I've got you. And so if you feel like you are gotten and supported and held in this podcast, definitely pay it forward and write a review. And maybe if you write a review, I'll be reading yours next time. I hope that you find the sparkle in everything you do. I'll talk to you again next week. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the AT Parenting Survival Podcast. To get additional support raising a child with anxiety or OCD, visit Natasha's online school of on-demand classes at atparentingsurvivalschool.com.